So a couple of things, particularly in the implications at the end, that really stood out for me. One was about the rise of leisure, the other was about online. So looking to leisure first, we absolutely recognise and see that strong growth over a sustained period of time in leisure, particularly amongst food and beverage. And that's kind of intuitive for us because we see that there's just more and more spend and demand from consumers on food and beverage. And when they're spending on that area, they tend to actually spend more in retail when they do it in the same trip. So taking our portfolio, we've moved from 2% up to 8% of F&B, and I'd envisage that doubling over the coming years. Looking to online, again, that's an interesting trend we obviously monitor quite closely. Some ONS figures are quoted in there. We did our own research with Verdict on the True Value stores, and we found actually 89% of all transactions in the UK are still touching a store in some way, whether that's going straight through the tills, click and collect, or people browsing in store and then buying online later. So we see that the online is growing, but actually the story here is not so much online versus offline. It's more about the evolution of the store and the changing face and role of retail, but physical is still very much at the heart of that.
There are a number of major issues that can be addressed, and those issues can be addressed by the government. In the short term, there are issues such as business rates, the apprenticeship levy, and the national living wage, all of which are going to provide incredible pressure on costs for retailers over the next few years. And a reappraisal of business rates would be a major step as far as the government is concerned. The other chestnut that has not been addressed over a long time has been the issue of planning. And the actual situation today is one of a very complex planning regulation in both high street and out of town. And a total review of planning which would allow more development to take place with less specific restrictions would be really helpful.
In terms of some of the issues in the report and how they can be addressed, I mean, this continued flexibility of high streets. We saw back in May the government introducing new permitted development rights. So I believe there's real optimism in terms of that continuing that dynamic and changing face of the high street. The other thing that struck me was it tends to be the tertiary locations where you are seeing the vacancies and also the sort of change in terms of moving out of retail. And I think it's that real positive planning and actually recognising that we do need to have a very much a central core and look to redevelop those tertiary locations. And in that regard, residential is perfect, increasing footfall, making the town centre a dynamic place. As well as thinking about workspace as well, because we know millennials make up, I think it's a third of the current workforce, and that's going up to 75% by 2025 is the statistics. So in terms of responding to that and making sure we're building and creating city centres, town centres that can also appeal to this generation.
I think the report raises some important issues and how to address them. I think, again, for me, space, and especially the long-term vacancies, is about the wrong space in the wrong location. I think there comes a tipping point or a point of no return for these locations, and it needs a concerted effort from local, maybe even central government, to finally make the decision that this space needs to, certainly from a retail environment, to leave the retail stock.
Obviously, there's a polarisation in terms of consistent vacancy rates in certain parts of the country. I think one of the few ways of really generating some demand for those units is through the use of rating mechanisms. I think with the rating revaluation due to come into effect in April 2017, there may be some automatic relief, if you like, for retailers in those locations. But strictly speaking, if we're going to entice particularly independent or new retailers into sites that haven't been used for some time, there really needs to be a fundamental rethink about rates and rates holidays for long periods of time.